Today, we're going to unravel one of the darkest chapters in modern history, how Nazism took hold and how a man like Adolf Hitler rose to absolute power. We'll trace the steps, one by one, that led an entire nation down a path of utter devastation.
But we're not going to start at the beginning. We're going to start at the very end. So picture this. It's the spring of 1945. World War II is grinding to its bloody conclusion, and Germany has lost. The air is thick with fear and uncertainty. And in the middle of all this chaos, an 11-year-old boy named Helmut is in his bed.
He's not asleep. He's listening. And he overhears his parents talking. His father, a doctor and a loyal Nazi, says these exact words to his wife. It's a bone-chilling confession, right? A moment where he admits, maybe for the first time, exactly what he knows they've done and what he fears is coming for them. The very next day, his father takes Helmut for a walk in the woods. They sing children's songs. It's the last good memory he'll ever have of him, because later that day, his dad walks into his office and shoots himself. All Helmut remembers from that moment is seeing his father's bloody uniform being shoved into the family fireplace. The trauma was so deep that for the next 9 years, he wouldn't eat a single meal at home. He was terrified his own mother would poison him.
So that's the question that hangs over everything, isn't it? What could bring a man and a whole country to this point of total moral and physical collapse? To figure that out, we have to go back in time, back to the end of another war that really set the stage for this whole tragedy.
So our journey really starts with the birth of a brand new German democracy right after World War I. It was called the Weimar Republic. But the thing is, it was a government born out of defeat, and it was built on some seriously shaky ground. It was like a house built on quicksand.
See, before all this, Germany was a powerful empire. It fought in the First World War, but after 4 brutal years, especially once the USA jumped in, Germany lost. The emperor fled, and in November 1918, a new government, a democracy, was put in place. They met in a city called Weimar, and that's how the Weimar Republic got its name.
But then came the peace treaty, the Treaty of Versailles, and it was absolutely crushing. I mean, it wasn't just tough, it felt designed to humiliate. Germany lost a huge chunk of its land, nearly all its valuable resources like iron and coal, its overseas colonies, and its military was basically dismantled. On top of all that, it was forced to take all the blame for the war and pay a mind-boggling £6 billion in damages. It was a recipe for disaster.
And right away, this created a huge problem. A lot of Germans didn't look at the new Weimar Republic and see a fresh start. No, they saw the government that surrendered, the government that signed this humiliating treaty. They blamed this new democracy for everything. The people who supported it were mockingly called the November Criminals, and that name stuck, poisoning politics for years.
So you've got this political mess, and then, bam, an economic catastrophe hits. By 1923, Germany couldn't afford to pay its war reparations anymore. When they defaulted, France just marched in and occupied their main industrial region, the Ruhr, to take coal as payment. And the German government, in a total panic, they did the worst thing you can possibly do. They just started printing money. And I mean printing it like there was no tomorrow.
Just watch how insane this gets. In April of 1923, $1 US was worth 24,000 German marks. That's already pretty bad, right? But hold on, we're just getting started. A few months later, by August, that same dollar was worth over 4.6 million marks. The currency was in total absolute freefall.
And by the end of the year, in December, one single dollar was worth almost 99 million marks. It just kept going, eventually hitting trillions. The German mark was, for all intents and purposes, completely worthless.
And this wasn't just some abstract economic problem. This was real life. You've probably seen the pictures. People literally had to haul wheelbarrows full of cash, cartloads of it, just to go out and buy a single loaf of bread. That image of total chaos was burned into the memory of every single German.
Eventually, the Americans stepped in and helped stabilize things. And for a little while, from about 1924 to 1928, things seemed to calm down. But here's the catch. This stability was, as the source material puts it, built on sand. It all depended on short-term loans from the U.S. So what do you think happened when the Wall Street stock market crashed in 1929? You guessed it. The money dried up overnight.
The Great Depression slammed Germany harder than almost anywhere else. Industrial output just collapsed.
Unemployment skyrocketed to 6 million people. You had men standing on street corners with signs around their necks that said willing to do any work. People's life savings? Gone. Wiped out. A feeling of just deep, hopeless despair fell over the entire country.
So you might be wondering, why couldn't the government do anything? Well, turns out the Republic's own constitution had a couple of fatal flaws. First, it had this system called proportional representation, which basically made it impossible for any one party to get a majority. That meant you had an endless cycle of weak, shaky coalition governments that couldn't agree on anything. And second, there was Article 48, a kind of emergency button that let the president just suspend all civil rights and rule by himself. It was a disaster waiting to happen. The people completely lost faith in the democratic process.
So what happens when you have economic collapse, social misery, and a broken political system? You get a vacuum. And into this vacuum stepped Adolf Hitler and his Nazi party. They saw this moment of total crisis as their golden opportunity.
I mean, just look at these numbers. It's staggering. In 1928, before the Depression really hit, the Nazis got a measly 2.6% of the vote. They were a joke, a fringe group. 4 years later, in 1932, they were the single largest party in Germany, with 37% of the vote. In just 4 years, Nazism had become a massive movement.
So how on earth did that happen? Well, Hitler was an incredible public speaker, and he gave people simple, powerful promises when they felt like they had nothing left. He said, "I'll build a strong nation. I will rip up that Versailles Treaty. I will restore your dignity. I will get you jobs, and I will get rid of all the foreign influences that are holding us back." To a desperate nation, this sounded like salvation.
And this part is absolutely key. It wasn't just what he promised, it was how he did it. The Nazis created a whole new kind of politics based on pure spectacle. We're talking massive rallies, giant red banners with the swastika, the famous salute, huge rounds of applause on command. All of it was designed to make people feel a sense of power and belonging, and to make Hitler look like a messiah, a savior who had come to rescue Germany from its misery.
Finally, on January 30th, 1933, the old conservative elite, thinking they could use Hitler for their own ends, persuaded the president to make him chancellor. It was one of the worst miscalculations in history, because the second Hitler got his hands on power, he started to tear German democracy apart from the inside, and he did it with terrifying speed.
The whole thing was shockingly systematic. First, a mysterious fire breaks out in the Parliament building. The Nazis immediately blame their enemies and use it as an excuse to issue the fire decree, which basically suspended all civil rights. Freedom of speech, freedom of the press, poof, gone. A few days later came the final blow, the Enabling Act. This law effectively made Hitler a dictator, giving him the power to do whatever he wanted without Parliament's approval. In about a month, democracy in Germany was completely dead.
With democracy out of the way, the Nazis moved to control every single part of German life. All other political parties, banned. The government took over the economy, the media, the courts, everything. And to enforce their rule, they created a terrifying web of secret police and security forces. You've heard the names: the Gestapo, the SS. These were the tools that gave the Nazi state its reputation as a dreaded criminal state, a place where you could be arrested, tortured, or sent away without anyone to protect you.
But just grabbing political power was never the end goal. That was only step one. The real, ultimate aim of the Nazis was driven by a sick and twisted ideology, a worldview that would justify everything they were about to do next.
At the very heart of Nazi ideology was a racist fantasy. They believed in a strict racial hierarchy. At the absolute top were the so-called Aryans, what they imagined as blonde, blue-eyed Nordic Germans. This, they said, was the master race, the finest race, and it was their destiny to rule the world. Everyone else was ranked below them. And at the very bottom of this ladder, they placed the Jews, who they saw as their ultimate enemy.
The other half of their worldview was an idea they called Lebensraum, which just means living space. Hitler believed that for this master Aryan race to grow and prosper, it needed more land. And that land, he argued, would have to be taken by force, conquered in Eastern Europe to expand the power and resources of the German nation.
As soon as they got power, the Nazis started trying to make this racial fantasy a reality. The first phase of their plan, which lasted from 1933 to 1939, was all about exclusion. It was about creating a pure German community by pushing out everyone they considered undesirable, and they started with the Jews. The Nuremberg Laws of 1935 were the legal weapon they used to do it. These laws systematically stripped Jewish people of every single right. Suddenly, they were no longer citizens of their own country.
They couldn't marry Germans. Their businesses were taken away. Their property was confiscated. They were legally segregated, terrorized, and systematically impoverished. They were made into strangers in their own homes.
So by the late 1930s, think about where we are. The Nazis have total control. Democracy is gone. They've put in place a legal system based on pure racial hatred, and they've already started excluding their victims from society. The system is built, the ideology is in place. So the terrifying question becomes, what's next? What happens when this hatred moves beyond just laws and boycotts into its next, even more brutal phase? And that is a question for part 2.